When people around the world turn on the news, they often see headlines about conflicts, diplomatic disputes, military operations, economic struggles, and political instability. Many view these events as isolated crises, disconnected from one another and limited to specific regions. Yet when we look carefully at the Middle East today, a very different picture emerges. What appears to be a collection of separate tensions is, in reality, a network of interconnected developments that are steadily increasing the possibility of a much larger confrontation. The Middle East is closer to war than most people realize, not because of a single event, but because of the convergence of many factors at the same time. Regional rivalries, ideological extremism, shifting alliances, nuclear ambitions, proxy conflicts, and global power competition are all colliding in one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. The danger does not lie merely in any one dispute. The danger lies in the way these disputes overlap and reinforce one another. For decades, the Middle East has been characterized by instability. Wars have come and gone. Governments have risen and fallen. Terrorist organizations have emerged, expanded, and sometimes been defeated. Yet, despite these recurring crises, there have often been mechanisms that prevented escalation into a wider regional war. Today, many of those restraints are weakening. One of the most significant realities shaping the region is the struggle for influence between competing powers. Nations are not merely defending their borders, they are seeking strategic dominance. This competition extends far beyond traditional military strength. It involves intelligence operations, cyber warfare, economic pressure, proxy militias, diplomatic maneuvering, and information campaigns. The battlefield is no longer limited to tanks and aircraft. It includes technology, energy infrastructure, trade routes, and public perception. Iran remains one of the central players in this unfolding story. Over the years, it has built a network of allies and proxy groups across the region. These relationships extend into multiple countries and provide Tehran with influence far beyond its own borders. Support for armed organizations allows Iran to project power while maintaining a degree of distance from direct confrontation. This strategy has changed the security landscape of the Middle East. The concern among many regional governments is not merely what Iran says, but what it does. Missile development, drone capabilities, military cooperation with proxy forces, and ongoing nuclear activities have created deep anxiety among neighboring states. Every advancement in these areas raises questions about future intentions and potential consequences. At the same time, Israel faces a security environment unlike any in its history. Threats exist on multiple fronts. Organizations hostile to its existence possess increasingly sophisticated weapons. Precision-guided missiles, armed drones, and advanced surveillance technologies have transformed the nature of conflict. The challenge is no longer simply defending against conventional armies. It is responding to threats that can emerge from several directions simultaneously. What makes the situation especially dangerous is the possibility of miscalculation. History shows that major wars are not always planned years in advance. Sometimes they begin because leaders misunderstand each other's intentions. Sometimes a limited military operation triggers an unexpected response. Sometimes a single attack creates a chain reaction that no one anticipated. The Middle East today contains numerous flashpoints where such a scenario could occur. A strike on a military installation could provoke retaliation. An attack by a proxy group could draw multiple nations into conflict. A confrontation at sea could disrupt global trade and energy supplies. A border incident could rapidly escalate into a regional crisis. The number of potential triggers is greater than many observers appreciate. Another factor often overlooked is the role of great power competition. The Middle East is not operating in isolation. Global powers have strategic interests throughout the region. Military bases, naval deployments, energy resources, and geopolitical partnerships ensure that developments in the Middle East attract international attention. The involvement of external powers can sometimes help prevent conflict through diplomacy and deterrence. However, it can also increase complexity. When local disputes intersect with broader geopolitical rivalries, the stakes become higher. Actions taken by regional actors may be interpreted through the lens of global competition, making resolution more difficult. Energy remains another critical element. Despite efforts to diversify global energy sources, the Middle East continues to play a major role in world markets. Disruptions to production or transportation routes can have consequences far beyond the region. Investors, governments, and consumers around the world are affected by instability in these strategic corridors. This reality means that even conflicts appearing local can have international repercussions. A military confrontation involving key energy-producing states would not remain confined to regional headlines. It would affect economies, supply chains, inflation rates, and political calculations across continents. Meanwhile, non-state actors continue to influence events. Armed groups, militias, and extremist organizations often operate according to agendas that differ from those of national governments. Their actions can complicate diplomatic efforts and create crises that leaders struggle to control. Some of these organizations thrive in environments where governance is weak and instability is widespread. They exploit grievances, recruit followers, and establish networks that can endure for years. Even when military pressure reduces their capabilities, the underlying conditions that enable their growth often remain. Technology has also transformed the strategic environment. Drones that were once available only to advanced militaries can now be deployed by smaller groups. Cyber attacks can target critical infrastructure without a single soldier crossing a border. Information warfare can shape public opinion and influence political decisions. These developments lower the threshold for conflict. A nation no longer needs a massive army to create disruption. Relatively inexpensive technologies can produce significant effects. As these capabilities spread, the risk of escalation increases. Yet military considerations tell only part of the story. The Middle East is also experiencing profound political and social transformations. Younger populations are demanding economic opportunity, accountability, and stability. Governments face pressure to address domestic concerns while navigating external threats. Economic challenges, demographic trends, and social expectations all influence strategic decisions. Leaders must balance national security with internal priorities. In some cases, external confrontations can distract from domestic difficulties. In others, economic realities may encourage restraint. Understanding regional dynamics requires recognizing that decisions are shaped by both internal and external pressures. Diplomatic normalization efforts between certain countries have altered the regional landscape as well. Relationships that once seemed impossible are now realities. Cooperation in areas such as trade, technology, security, and infrastructure has created new opportunities. At the same time, these developments have generated opposition from actors who view such partnerships as threats to their own interests. Whenever alliances shift, the strategic calculations of all parties change. Nations reassess risks, opportunities, and vulnerabilities. Some seek closer cooperation. Others seek ways to counter emerging coalitions. Thus, adjustments can either contribute to stability or increase tensions, depending on how they unfold. One of the most striking aspects of the current situation is the contrast between public perception and strategic reality. Many people assume that because large-scale regional war has not yet occurred, the danger must be diminishing. In fact, the absence of war does not necessarily indicate the presence of peace. Sometimes it reflects a temporary equilibrium sustained by deterrence, caution, and circumstance. History offers numerous examples of periods in which tensions accumulated gradually before erupting suddenly. Warning signs were visible, but they were often ignored because people became accustomed to living with risk. What seemed normal was actually precarious. Today, military planners throughout the region are preparing for scenarios that many civilians rarely consider. Defense systems are being upgraded. Intelligence cooperation is expanding. Strategic partnerships are evolving. These actions reflect assessments that significant threats exist and must be taken seriously. The humanitarian implications of a wider conflict would be severe. Civilian populations would bear enormous costs. Infrastructure could be damaged. Economic activity could be disrupted. Displacement could increase. The suffering associated with war extends far beyond military objectives and political calculations. This reality underscores the importance of diplomacy. Even in periods of intense hostility, communication channels matter. Negotiations may appear slow and frustrating, but they often provide alternatives to escalation. The challenge is that diplomacy succeeds only when parties believe that compromise serves their interests better than confrontation. Unfortunately, ideological commitments can make compromise difficult. Some actors view conflicts through absolute terms that leave little room for negotiation. When political objectives are linked to deeply held ideological beliefs, flexibility becomes harder to achieve. Religious, historical, and cultural factors also shape perspectives throughout the Middle East. The region is not merely a geopolitical arena. It is a place rich with history, identity, and spiritual significance. Events are often interpreted through narratives that extend far beyond contemporary politics. For millions of people, developments in the Middle East carry meaning that transcends diplomacy and military affairs. They are connected to questions of heritage, faith, and destiny. Whether one approaches these issues from a religious or secular perspective, it is impossible to understand the region fully without acknowledging the power of these convictions. Many observers therefore watch current events with a sense that history is moving toward a significant moment. They see alliances shifting, tensions rising, and long-standing assumptions being challenged. They recognize patterns that suggest the region is entering a new phase. Yet it is important to avoid both complacency and sensationalism. Complacency ignores genuine dangers. Sensationalism exaggerates them. Wisdom requires a balanced approach that recognizes reality without surrendering to fear. The facts themselves are serious enough. Multiple conflicts remain unresolved. Military capabilities continue to expand. Strategic competition is intensifying. Regional and global interests are intersecting in increasingly complex ways. These trends deserve careful attention. At the same time, war is not inevitable. Human decisions matter. Leadership matters. Diplomacy matters. Strategic restraint matters. Nations can choose paths that reduce tensions rather than inflame them. The future is influenced by choices made in the present. Nevertheless, preparedness requires clear-eyed analysis. Hope is not a strategy. Ignoring warning signs does not make them disappear. Understanding risks is an essential step toward preventing catastrophe. The Middle East stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward greater cooperation, economic development, and regional integration. The other leads toward confrontation, instability, and destruction. The direction ultimately taken will depend on decisions made by governments, organizations, and individuals across the region and beyond. For those watching these developments, the lesson is simple. Pay attention. The forces shaping the Middle East today are significant. They affect not only the people who live there, but also the broader international community. Security, economics, diplomacy, and global stability are all connected to what happens in this region. We live in an age when information is abundant, yet understanding is often scarce. Headlines come and go quickly. Attention shifts from one crisis to another. But some developments require sustained focus because their consequences can reshape entire regions. The Middle East is one of those places. The tensions are real, the stakes are high, the risks are substantial. While no one can predict the exact course of future events, the indicators suggest that the region is experiencing a period of unusual volatility. That is why the statement that the Middle East is closer to war than most realize deserves serious consideration. It is not a prediction designed to create fear. It is an observation based on the convergence of strategic, political, military, and ideological factors that are all moving simultaneously. The coming years will reveal whether these pressures can be managed through diplomacy, deterrence, and cooperation, or whether they will culminate in broader conflict. The outcome remains uncertain. What is certain is that the decisions being made today will influence the future of the region for generations. As we watch these events unfold, we should remain informed, thoughtful, and aware of the significance of this moment. History often turns on developments that seem gradual until suddenly they are not. The Middle East may be approaching such a moment now. Let us look closer at the specific alignments that are taking shape right now, because the map of the Middle East is being redrawn, not with new borders, but with new alliances. Historically, certain nations in this region were bitter enemies. Today, we are witnessing unprecedented military and economic coordination between them. You have to ask yourself why. The answer is that a shared objective is overriding centuries of historical friction. Look at the relationship between Moscow and Tehran. For years, this was a relationship of convenience, often marked by mutual suspicion. But recent global events have accelerated a profound shift. We are now seeing an axis forming that should deeply alarm the West, even if they are currently too distracted to notice. Iran has supplied thousands of suicide drones and ballistic technology to Russia, effectively testing its weaponry against European targets. In exchange, what is Tehran receiving? They are not doing this for charity. They are receiving advanced fighter jets, air defense systems, cyber warfare capabilities, and most concerning of all, potential assistance in crossing the final threshold of their nuclear program. This Russian-Iranian axis directly impacts the security of Israel and the broader Middle East. For years, Israel operated with relative freedom in the skies over Syria to prevent the transfer of game-changing weapons from Iran to its proxies. There was a delicate deconfliction mechanism in place with Moscow. But as Russia grows more dependent on Iran, that dynamic is changing rapidly. The airspace is becoming more contested. The rhetoric from Moscow has shifted from neutral arbitration to outright hostility toward Israeli defensive actions. Then we must look toward the north, to Turkey. Here is a NATO member strategically straddling Europe and Asia, possessing the second largest army in the alliance. Yet, the leadership in Ankara is steering the country away from its Western alliances and leaning heavily toward an Islamist neo-Ottoman vision. The rhetoric coming from Turkish leadership regarding Israel and the West is increasingly aggressive. When you see Russia, Iran, and Turkey holding joint summits, coordinating policies in Syria, and aligning their geopolitical postures, you are looking at a coalition that has never existed in this exact formulation in all of recorded history. Anyone who studies ancient Middle Eastern history and biblical antiquity knows the significance of these three powers aligning. Thousands of years ago, Prophets wrote about a future coalition, a massive alliance coming from the far north, joined by Persia, moving against a reborn nation of Israel. For centuries, such an alliance seemed impossible. Today, you can read about it in the morning newspaper. The pieces are moving into place on the geopolitical chessboard, exactly as it was foretold. Meanwhile, Tehran has systematically built what Israeli military intelligence calls the Ring of Fire. Iran understood long ago that it could not defeat Israel or challenge Western interests in a conventional, symmetrical war. So they changed the rules of the game. They created, funded, trained, and armed proxy militias across the entire region, completely encircling their primary target. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is no longer just a militia. It is a terror army that holds a sovereign nation hostage. They possess over 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed directly at Israeli cities. But the sheer number is no longer the primary concern. It is the precision. Iran has been smuggling precision-guided munition kits into Lebanon to upgrade these rockets. A dumb rocket can cause damage if it happens to hit a populated area. A precision-guided missile can target critical infrastructure, power plants, desalination facilities, military bases, and government centers. With a margin of error of just a few meters. To the south, in Gaza, we have seen exactly what happens when Iran activates one of its proxies. The strategy is to draw Israel into a grueling, multi-front war of attrition, aiming to exhaust its military, bleed its economy, and turn international public opinion against it. But Gaza is just one piece of the puzzle. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are merely the forward operating basis for Tehran's ambitions. Look further south to Yemen. The Houthis, armed and directed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have effectively choked off one of the most critical maritime choke points in the world, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. By firing anti-ship ballistic missiles and drones at commercial vessels, they have disrupted global shipping, forcing companies to reroute around the entire continent of Africa. This drives up the cost of goods, increases insurance premiums, and fuels global inflation. The Houthis are proving that a ragged militia, backed by Iranian technology, can hold the global economy hostage. And yet the international response has been largely defensive, treating the symptoms while ignoring the disease in Tehran. To the east, in Iraq and Syria, dozens of radical Shia militias operate with impunity. They serve a dual purpose. First, to attack American military installations to force a US withdrawal from the region. And second, to maintain a land bridge that stretches from Tehran through Baghdad and Damascus, all the way to Beirut and the Mediterranean Sea. This corridor allows Iran to move weapons, fighters, and equipment seamlessly across the Middle East. The strategy of the Ayatollahs is brilliant in its wickedness. They want to fight Israel to the last Arab. They sit safely in Tehran, pulling the strings, watching as Gaza is destroyed, Lebanon is destabilized, Syria remains in ruins, and Yemen starves. The regime sacrifices Arab lives to advance its own Persian, fundamentalist hegemony, all while inching closer to the ultimate prize, a nuclear umbrella. Once Iran crosses the nuclear threshold, the entire paradigm of the Middle East changes overnight. A nuclear Iran would provide an impenetrable shield of deterrence over this entire ring of fire. If Hezbollah launches a massive strike on Tel Aviv, how does Israel respond if it knows Tehran possesses a nuclear weapon? How do Sunni Arab states like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates react? They will not wait around. The moment Iran gets the bomb, it will trigger the most rapid and dangerous nuclear arms race the world has ever seen, right in the most unstable region on the planet. The Sunni Arab nations understand this threat completely. This is why the Abraham Accords were possible. Nations like the UAE and Bahrain did not suddenly wake up one morning and decide they love Israel. They looked at the map, they looked at the receding influence of the United States, and they looked at the aggressive expansion of Iran. They realized that Israel is the only country in the region with the intelligence capabilities, the military strength, and the political will to stand up to the regime in Tehran. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and in the Middle East, survival dictates your alliances. However, these new relationships are fragile. Iran knows that a fully integrated Middle East, where Israel and Saudi Arabia normalize relations and create a unified economic and security bloc, would mean the end of their regional dominance. Therefore, every action Iran takes right now is designed to blow up that possibility. By inciting conflict, they force the Arab street into a frenzy, making it politically impossible for moderate Arab leaders to publicly align with Israel. We also must factor in the current state of the West. The leaders in Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing watch the news just like we do. They do not see a strong, unified, resolute Western alliance. They see a fractured, polarized society consumed by internal cultural wars and political division. They see a United States heading into contentious elections where foreign policy is often treated as a partisan football rather than a matter of global stability. Dictators and rogue regimes have a keen sense of timing. They know that when the world's policeman is looking inward, distracted by its own domestic turmoil, a window of opportunity opens. The deterrence that once kept these bad actors in check has severely eroded. We have moved from a doctrine of deterrence to a posture of appeasement. History screams at us that appeasing tyrants never brings peace. It only guarantees that the eventual war will be fought on much worse terms, with a much higher cost in human life. This erosion of deterrence is why the concept of peace and security is so deceptive right now. You hear diplomats and politicians constantly talking about de-escalation, ceasefires, and returning to the status quo. But the status quo in the Middle East is a ticking time bomb. The international community continues to apply Western logic to a Middle Eastern reality. They believe that economic incentives, sanctions relief, and diplomatic agreements can change the ideological DNA of a radical regime. This is a fatal misunderstanding. The leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran and their proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah do not care about building a prosperous society. They are driven by an apocalyptic, radical theology that mandates the destruction of Israel and the subjugation of the West. You cannot buy off that kind of ideology with pallets of cash or unfreezing assets. When you give them money, they do not build hospitals and schools. They build underground terror tunnels and precision-guided missiles. We are watching the rapid convergence of these elements. The military buildup is unprecedented. The technological advancements in warfare, such as AI and cyber capabilities, are being integrated into these ancient hatreds. The shifting geopolitical alliances are isolating the nations that stand for freedom. We are witnessing the stage being set, the actors taking their places, and the lights going down. Every single day, military commanders in the IDF are making calculations not about if a wider war breaks out, but when and where the first major domino will fall. The deception is that life goes on. People go to work, coffee shops in Tel Aviv are full, traffic still clogs the highways. But beneath the surface, intelligence agencies are watching the movement of missile launchers in southern Lebanon. They are tracking the enrichment of uranium in underground facilities at Fordow and Natanz. They are monitoring the docking of Russian cargo planes in Tehran. They are intercepting communications between militia commanders in Syria and Iraq. The tension on the fault lines is building to a level that cannot be sustained indefinitely. Consider the psychological warfare that accompanies this physical buildup. The enemies of Israel and the West are engaged in a massive coordinated campaign of cognitive warfare. Using social media networks, state-run media, and cyberbots, they are flooding the minds of the younger generation in the West with a rewritten version of history. They are successfully turning the victims into the aggressors and the terrorists into freedom fighters. By winning the information war on college campuses and in the streets of Western capitals, they are attempting to strip Israel of the international legitimacy it needs to defend itself. When the major confrontation finally comes, they want the West to be so morally confused and internally divided that they will not lift a finger to intervene. So where does all of this leave us? It leaves us with a choice. We can ignore the warning signs because they are uncomfortable, or we can recognize the reality unfolding before our eyes. The Middle East is not moving toward greater stability by accident. The region is standing at a historic crossroads where every decision, every alliance, every military buildup, and every diplomatic move carries enormous consequences. The greatest mistake people make before major world-changing events is assuming that tomorrow will look exactly like today. History teaches the opposite. Entire eras can change in a matter of days. What seemed impossible suddenly becomes reality. What appeared stable is exposed as fragile. What many dismissed as unlikely becomes unavoidable. The warning signs are no longer hidden. They are visible. The alliances are forming. The weapons are being stockpiled. The rhetoric is intensifying. The strategic positions are being established. The tension is rising on every front. These are not isolated developments. They are pieces of a much larger picture. But this message is not one of fear. Fear clouds judgment. Fear paralyzes people. The purpose of understanding what is happening is not to live in anxiety, but to live with awareness. A generation that understands the times in which it lives is far better prepared than a generation that chooses ignorance. The future of the Middle East will not be determined by headlines alone. It will be determined by the character of leaders, the wisdom of nations, and the willingness of people to see reality as it is, rather than as they wish it to be. The stakes are immense because what happens in this region will not remain in this region. The effects will reach every continent, every economy, and every nation connected to our increasingly interconnected world. As we leave this discussion, remember one thing: history is accelerating. Events that once took decades are now unfolding in years. Developments that once took years are now unfolding in months. The world is changing before our eyes, and the Middle East remains at the center of that transformation. The question is not whether significant events are coming. The question is whether people will recognize the signs before those events arrive. Stay informed. Stay vigilant, watch carefully, because the decisions being made today may shape the course of history tomorrow, and the world may be far closer to a defining moment than most people realize.